ITV News has been given rare access to film with rebel fighters in Myanmar, the country we used to call Burma, which has for the last 4 years been ripped apart by civil war. Since the start of the conflict, more than 3 million people have been displaced, tens of thousands have died, and half the population is living in poverty. Well, now the military regime, which seized power in a coup, is on the defensive in large swathes of the country as rebel forces advance. Our Asia correspondent Debbie Edward sent this special report.
These men are part of the pro-democracy forces that believe they can bring down the military junta in Myanmar. The Karen National Liberation Army is one of the most established of several Burmese ethnic armies, which have been gaining ground on the regime after it seized power in a coup 3.5 years ago. We entered Myanmar under KNLA guard, on roads battered by this year's rainy season. The jungle through which we ploughed in Karen State is the unforgiving staging ground in this civil war. It has become increasingly difficult and dangerous for journalists to enter the country. The military government doesn't welcome coverage showing how unstable and unsafe Myanmar has become under its rule. In recent months, bombings on rebel facilities have intensified, and the junta has been using its superior air power to destroy villages and towns. The KNLA has tried to deter the jet attacks with heavy machine gun fire, but as this soldier says, it is anti-aircraft missiles they need. More than 3 million people have evacuated, a majority since the start of this year. The UN estimates more than 18 million people are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance, but aid agencies are struggling to get access to the country. There are more than 5,000 people living in this camp for internally displaced persons close to the Thai border.
Most of the families living here were forced to flee villages or areas which were bombed. And some of them are still so traumatised that they choose to sleep in the forest rather than in these temporary shelters which they fear could still be a target.
Ai and her daughter are among the newest arrivals. She thinks her village was targeted because several anti-junta protesters were living there. In a village further into the jungle, we went to a church to meet dozens of people who had fled their homes after the junta enforced a conscription law. From February, all men and women from the age of 18 became subject to mandatory military service, an indication that the junta needs reinforcements. A show of hands showed that a majority of those we met were trying to escape conscription. This pregnant woman and her husband found out their names were on the list. They asked not to be identified because their parents are still living in a military-controlled area. The regime's rule was described as a reign of terror. The military stands accused of extrajudicial killings, rape, and burning people alive in their homes. Thousands of dissenters have been arrested, and many have died after violent torture in jail. The junta denies committing atrocities and claims the pro-democracy forces are spreading false news. This group of 10 friends fled to the jungle from one of Myanmar's main cities. In their teens and 20s, they all had jobs or were studying, when suddenly their urban lives and bright futures came under threat.
ဆွဲပဲပါညာအဲ့လောက်ထိဖြစ်လာတော့ဘယ်လိုပြောမလဲဟိုမလွတ်တော့လေအသက်ရွယ်တွေပါပြေးသွားတဲ့ခါကြလို့ရှိရင်ဘယ်သူမှမလွတ်တော့ဘူးမလွတ်တော့တဲ့ခါကျတော့မထွက်ပြေးရင်မရတော့တဲ့အနေထားဖြစ်သွားတယ်ဟိုမှာတော့ဟိုမှာဘယ်လိုပြောပုံမှန်ဘဝပေါ့သွားနိုးမယ်ပြီးအလုပ်သွားမယ်ပြန်လာမယ်အားလေးရက်တွေရှောက်သွားမယ်အဲ့လိုမျိုးပေါ့တကယ်ပုံမှန်လေပတ်လေဒီမှာကျတော့အခက်ခဲနဲ့ပြေးလာတာဆိုတော့အဲ့လိုကွာတော့ဒီမှာကျခက်ခဲရှိတာပေါ့
Many young men and women have chosen to join the revolutionary ranks rather than fight for the junta. The conscription law has inadvertently boosted the resistance, helping the pro-democracy forces build momentum following a series of coordinated attacks that have helped them to take control of more than half of the country's territory.
The KNLA won't give us the exact numbers on the size of their fighting force. They want to keep the military junta in the dark, but they will say that their army has more than doubled since the start of this conflict, and they are training more all the time. Most of the men and women in this brigade are new recruits.
The KNLA wants the United Nations to sanction the military junta and choke off its weapons supply. Their spokesman said the British government, as a former ruler of Burma, should not ignore the ongoing conflict.
UK government အနေနဲ့လည်းဟုတ်ကျွန်တော်တို့ကိုနည်းနည်း view site ပေးပါလို့တော့ကျွန်တော်လည်း message ပေးခြင်းပါတယ်
Before we left, we were given access to a medical centre for wounded soldiers, most with life-changing injuries. Conditions were cramped and resources were scarce, but morale was still remarkably high. On the second floor, we met Mike. In May this year, he got hit by an RPG.
The RPG ball piece right here. The piece, the ball piece go inside here.
In May this year, he got hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. He was working at a five-star hotel in Singapore, but after the coup, he left to join the KNLA. He became one of their most skilled gunners. Mike is waiting on his third surgery, but plans to return to the front line.
Everyone stay in here. They're taking care of themselves to recover. After that, everyone will go back inside and fight again. Yeah.
In close to 4 years of conflict in Myanmar, more than 3 million people have lost their homes, tens of thousands have died, and half of the population is living in poverty. With the economy also in crisis, the country is on the brink of becoming a failed state. The one message we kept hearing from those we met was help us. Tell the rest of the world we need their support. Debbie Edward, ITV News, Karen State, Myanmar.